Hi, it's me, Crystal, and I decided I'm going to do a stats video this year. I thought about doing one last year, but I didn't think it would be interesting, but let's see if this is interesting. I'm also a lot more organized this year than I was last year, also. Okay, so I have 6 pie charts, and when the pie chart comes up, I will put it right here for the categories, and I'm just gonna get started. And I'm just going to start at the top of my note page. And that is with the number of books that I read. So my reading goal for 2021 was to read 53 books, I think. And I had like a soft goal of reading as close to 75 as possible. So I ended up reading 76 books for the year. And so the total number of pages is 21,199, which I think broke down to an average of 284 pages per book, which sounds pretty accurate given that a couple of books were really long and several books were really short. And my average rating, according to Goodreads, was a 3.9, and I'm actually pretty disappointed in that. I thought it was going to be higher. I mean, I know that's not bad, but I really thought it was going to be like a 4 or something. But I guess it seems accurate. It seems like an accurate reflection of my reading year, though. So my most read genre of last year was, of course, fantasy. Now, I did not break that down into the different kinds of fantasy, and that I also didn't include paranormal books in that category. I think for this year, I'm still keeping paranormal separate, but I am going to break the fantasy down into different subcategories, so I know what subgenre of fantasy I read the most, but that was definitely my most read genre of the year. If you want to know, that equated to 13 books. The only thing I read more than fantasy was just straight graphic novels. I did have my graphic novels broken down into genre as well, and my most read graphic novel genre was horror, to the surprise of no one. My least read genre of last year was a tie between historical fiction and sci-fi. Also, not a surprise. I like historical fiction, but I just about never pick it up. And that's because I just feel like most historical fiction is like around some kind of a war, and I'm just not into war fiction. It's just not interesting to me. But as far as other non-war category historical fiction, I do tend to really enjoy it, but I only read 2 historical fiction books last year, and I also read 2 sci-fi books, which I'm actually really surprised by because normally I read 0 sci-fi books. And then total number of DNFs I had was 14, which if you saw last week's video, then you already know that, but that's an official stat, so I wrote it down. So my best reading months were a tie between February and June. And this is best reading month as far as like number of books read. And I think I read 10 books both of these months. So, in fact, I know I read 10 books both of these months because I read 10 books in February. So if it's a tie, then I also read 10 books in June. And then my best reading month by average rating is also a tie between August and December. And that is a 4.5. It's a really good reading month as far as enjoyment goes. I'm not surprised by December because December was a really good reading month. And then my worst reading month by number of books. This is also a tie. This is September and November. I read 3 books this month. I say worst. It has like a negative connotation, but I mean, you know, the months I read the least amount of books for September and November. And I read 3 books in September and November. And then my worst reading month by average rating, it's not a tie, it was just September with an average rating of 3.0. Really dismal. And I think I had 1 4-star book, 1 3-star book, and 1 2-star book. So not a terrible reading month, but like the worst reading month of the year, which is good that my worst reading month of the year is also one of the months I read the least amount of books of the year. So at least it wasn't total torture, but maybe it would have been better if I had read more books. If you want to know what was in second place, it was a tie between May and November with 3.33 stars. Not good reading months. If you want to know what month is in second place as far as like best reading month for average rating, it was January with 4.375 stars. So getting into our first graph, this is a number of pages. And so the Most of the books that I read are under 400 pages. So I'm going to put my pie chart here, and then I'll read everything else off. So I read 26 books that were 200 pages or less. I read 14 books that were between 201 and 300 pages. I read 22 books that were between 301 and 400 pages. I read 11 books, surprisingly, that were between 400 and 500 pages. And then I read 3 books that were over 500 pages, which is like never happens. Also pretty sure one of those was a graphic novel, but it counts. For books over 500 pages, it's at 3.9% of my reading. I would actually personally round down to 3%, but anyway, 401 to 500 pages is 14.5% of my reading. 301 to 400 pages was 28.9%. 201 to 300 pages was 18.4%, and then 200 pages or less was 34.2%. So most of the graphic novels and poetry books are going to fall under this category. Also read some novellas. So, yeah. The next pie chart I have is for ratings. I didn't give any books 1 star because usually if I hate a book that much, I quit. I'm trying to do better. So pulling up the pie chart for the star ratings, I had 21 5-star books, which made for 27.6% of my reading. I had 32 4-star books, which is 42.1% of my reading. So very good to know that over 60% of my reading, almost 70% of my reading is positive reading experience, which is so great. And then 19 of the books I read were 3 stars, which is 25% of my reading. I want to get that number down this year. And then I only had 4 2-star books though. So that's really, really good. And that makes for, it looks like 5.3% of my reading. So I'm actually really happy about that. That's good. That's good. I'm mostly doing a good job picking books that I like, DNFing books that I don't like. Just making everything more positive reading experience all around. So the next graph I have, or the next pie chart I have, is for format. So I'm going to pull that chart up. And so number of physical books. Now I didn't differentiate between hardcover and paperback. I did initially, but when I had to get my reading journal reprinted because the paper in the first one just was not working for me, I combined them so I could add another line somewhere on the page. But I read a total of 56 physical books, which accounts for 70.9% of my reading, which is not a surprise. I read 13 ebooks, which accounts for 16.5% of my reading, which is also not a surprise. I do think I tend to average about 1 ebook a month. Need to kind of step that up a little bit, but no stress. And then I listened to 8 audiobooks, which accounted for 10.1% of my reading. And I'm kind of surprised that I listened to 8 audiobooks, especially because I feel like I spent 6-7 months listening to The Witching Hour. And then multi-format books. This is when I read a book in multiple formats. So I was like listening to the audiobook and reading the physical book, or listening to the audiobook and reading the ebook. And the number of times that happened was twice. And I do not know why I put this on book format, but I think it kind of skews the numbers a little bit. But anyway, it's 2.5% of my total reading was reading books in multiple formats. I just want to see how often I do that. So the next category I have is author stats. Do not ask me why I put library books on here, but I did. Okay. And the reason why I have this is I'm just trying to see how many books by male authors that I read, because the first year I tabulated this, I think I'd read like 6 or 7 books by male authors, and like 3 of them were by Joe Hill and 1 of them was by Stephen King. And I was just like, wow, Crystal, like, do you not like reading books by male authors? So I just wanted to keep track of it to see if like maybe that was just that year and normally I read more, or just maybe being aware of it if I would just like naturally read more books by male authors. So to keep things simple for myself, I just have male authors, female authors, co-authors, and authors of color. So obviously most of the books I read are by women. And I read 45 books by female authors and that accounts for 48.4%. Honestly, it's 50% of my reading because those 2 library books were also female authors. And I got 2 books from the library, so that's 2.2% of my reading. For this category definition, I don't know why I did this. But anyway, I read 30 books by male authors, which is 32.3% of my reading. And I read 1 co-authored book. To my knowledge, I don't always know if I'm reading a co-authored book, especially if they're writing under one name. But to my knowledge, I read 1 co-authored book, which of course is 1.1% of my reading. Then I read 15 books by authors of color. Most of these were graphic novels, but not all of them. And that makes for 16.1% of my reading. So this is another category I'm just keeping tabs on. I just want to see how many times I'm naturally, without trying, picking up a book by an author of color. Alright, so the next pie chart I have is for book genre. So I already have talked about my most read genre of the year is fantasy. So these are everything that I wrote down. I have a couple of other things kind of off to the side, but they're like subsections, and so I have like a contemporary section, and then I pulled out like 4 of the books as in like a contemporary literary fiction or contemporary romance fiction. And I read 1 anthology. I don't know if this number is going to equal 76 or not, because I don't know what genre this anthology was in. And it's a little all over the place, but let's just go through everything. Yeah, I also don't have children's books on here because I put children's books under age category. And I put graphic novels under format. So I also don't have the genre tabulations for graphic novels on this pie chart either. Gonna do a better job this year. Anyway, give me a second. Also, I realized these are not the best pie charts. I used somebody different than who I normally use. And I will not probably do that for this year. But anyway. So, in the bottom, we have a 3-way tie between the sci-fi, horror, and historical fiction. Now, I didn't include horror in my least read genres of the year just because most of my graphic novels that I read were horror, and so that actually bumps that category up a little bit. But as far as non-graphic novels go, I read 2 horror books, 2 historical fiction books, and 2 sci-fi books, and those all account for 3.7% of my reading. And then next, I read 4 paranormal books, and that accounts for 7.4% of my reading. And in the next space, we have a tie between nonfiction and contemporary. And I read 5 nonfiction books and 5 contemporary books, which is a surprise. And both of those account for, account for 9.3% of my reading. And if you want to know, the contemporary fiction is broken down. I had 2 literary fiction, although 1 was literary horror and 1 was literary contemporary fiction. And then I had 2 contemporary romance books that I read last year, which is crazy. Because like normally I read like 1 or 0. So next up from that, it looks like we have thriller and suspense books, which, let's be real, most of these are all suspense books. I don't really read thrillers. But there may be 1 or 2 like legit thrillers in here, but I'm pretty sure most of these are suspense. And I read 10 suspense books, which is like really a surprise because I didn't really start reading suspense until last year or the end of 2020. And I read 10 last year, and that accounts for, according to my chart, 18.5% of my reading. And then moving up from there, I read 11 poetry books, and that accounts for 20.4% of my reading. And I meant to read 1 a month, but I must have missed 1 month. So we'll try to make sure we get 12 or more poetry books read for this year. And then going up from there, the last category on this list is fantasy. I read 13 fantasy books, and that accounts for 24.1% of my reading. And the last category we're going to talk about, and the last pie chart, is categories. So these are age categories, and so I have adult, young adult, middle grade, children's books and classics. And so I combined children's books and picture books. And I don't know what I count as a children's books. I'm pretty sure these were children's classics. For some reason, I put classics in this category, but I'm also pretty sure 3 of these are also in the children's category. Yeah, I really messed up all of my pie charts, but we're just gonna go with what I did. And this is not going to equal 76 because I don't have the age categories for my graphic novels. So these are not going to add up if you're doing math in your head. So according to this, I had 24 adult books, 12 YA books, 0 middle grade books, 3 children's books, 6 classics, and 7 picture books. And I combined the children's and the picture books, so there were 10. And then, yeah. So adult books accounted for 36.4% of my reading. And I know this is kind of a little inaccurate, but it's probably closer to 40%, but let's just move on. And then 12 young adult books, which accounts for 18.2% of my reading. Children's books is 10, which accounts for 15.2% of my reading. Classics, 6. Account for 9.1% of my reading. And then I did put graphic novels on my book category. Look at your charts because before we start talking. Anyway, and then graphic novels, which I had 14, account for 21.2% of my reading, which seems accurate. So it seems like I mostly read adult books and graphic novels, and then we have a smattering of other stuff in there. I will try to make charts that make more sense. Part of that was the way I had things written down. So I did change that for my reading journal for this year. So things are going to be a little bit better organized in the next stats video, if I do another stats video. But I had fun. So that's everything. And just in case you want to know what my average rating was by month, I'm just going to go ahead and read through what I wrote down in case you want to know. And then that'll be it for this video. So January, I read 8 books and I had an average rating of 4.375. I also had the most DNFs that month. I had 4, and I don't think I had more than 2 or 3 for any other month. And I also didn't have any more DNFs, I think, like after September. So February, I read 10 books and I had an average rating of 3.9. In March, I read 6 books and I had an average rating of 3.67. In April, I read 8 books and I had an average rating of 3.75. In May, I read 6 books and I had an average rating of 3.33. In June, I read 10 books and I had an average rating of 4.2. That was a good reading month. In July, I read 7 books and I had an average rating of 3.857. In August, I read 4 books and I had an average rating of 4.5. In September, I read 3 books and I had an average rating of 3.0. Not a good reading month. In October, I read 5 books and I had an average rating of 4.0. In November, I read 3 books and I had an average rating of 3.33. Really didn't do much reading in November. And in December, I read 6 books and I had an average rating of 4.5. So that's all for this video. Feel free to share any stats that you want to share in the comment section. What month was your favorite reading month? What was your average rating of books for the year? How many pages did you read last year? Whatever you want to share. And I will see what video I feel like posting next week. And I will see you guys then. And I hope you have a great week. And I will talk to you later. Bye.